please join me in welcoming the brilliant, grounded, and occasionally myth-busting Dr. Chelsea Clinton. Delighted to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Mo. Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm thrilled that I'm wearing green to match the accent lighting. And really, just Mo, before we begin, I want to say what a joy your team at Quadrant has been to work with. And I know that large events like this run so smoothly when there's just been an extraordinary amount of energy and time and coordination invested and not a lot of sleep.
Yeah. Yes.
So just thank you to everyone who brought us here today, and really thank you to your team.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So maybe let me begin with your beginning. I mean, you've led anything but a typical life. Daughter, president, secretary of state. I'm sure those are formative experiences. But what were the events in your life that, when you reflect on it, have been most formative and have kind of shaped your path and where you are today?
Oh, goodness. Well, yes, I certainly am mindful of how, I think, to use your nomenclature, untypical my life in many ways has been, and yet also am deeply grateful that I have always had two parents for whom I was the most important part of their lives, and I never doubted that. I was on the front page of the newspaper the day after I was born. My dad was governor of Arkansas. He then lost in 1982. Arkansas was the last U.S. state to move from 2-year gubernatorial terms to 4-year terms. I remember being a little kid, and this will start to answer your question. I remember being a little kid when he was running in 1984 for re-election, and I remember handing out stickers and American flags, because when you're 3 or 4 years old and your parent is running for election, there's not that much else that one can do to be supportive and a cheerleader. And I have this vivid memory of kind of standing on the side of an event, and this older woman coming up to me and saying, aren't you just precious? And I was like, thank you so much. Hope you'll vote for my dad. Have a sticker. And she said, do you think you'll grow up and run for governor of Arkansas one day? And I was like, I'm not even in kindergarten. I'm not even in kindergarten. And I remember, the feeling of the conversation I had with my parents afterwards. I couldn't tell you kind of precisely how I relayed that anecdote or how they responded, but I remember, the sense of, we always expect you to, work hard and to make a contribution, but how you do that is certainly, important to be authentic and specific to you. And while my dad was governor of Arkansas, in the 80s and the early 90s, my mom was leading many, not-for-profit efforts in kind of expanding access to early childhood education, expanding access to credit for smallholder farmers in Arkansas. She was the chair of the Legal Services Corporation of America, and she was the chair of the effort to ensure that low-income Americans could have access to high-quality legal aid. I remember going with her on the weekends when she often would be kind of interviewing her clients, who overwhelmingly were women looking to get themselves out of domestic violence situations, and kind of sitting outside the domestic violence shelters, doing my homework or reading my book, and my mom certainly feeling the weight of the work and also the import of it. And I just share that because, Mo, I grew up kind of understanding, because I had a kind of ringside seat to people who were deeply called to civic service, one of whom kind of did that in the conventional way of public service, and one of whom did that in, I thought, still deeply kind of meaningful and impactful ways, although later my mom would certainly run for office. I, though, just never doubted that my parents were kind of not only proverbially, but actually in my corner. I mean, I remember them shouting at every softball game and soccer game. And my dad will still tell you to this day he feels guilty about the choir concert he missed when I was in 5th grade. I don't even remember that my dad missed the choir concert in 5th grade, but the amount of pain that he still feels that he couldn't, orchestrate his calendar to be also at that, just has had a deep impact on how I've thought about the responsibility that I have to the ethos and the ethic of my parents, and also the responsibility that I have to myself, and now increasingly, to the world that I want my children to grow up in, and God willing, grow old in.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does explain, your commitment to a whole range of social causes, which we'll get into, and all the ways in which you are driving impact. I guess the question I'm curious about is, because there's a lot of folks in this room who are next generation members of very, very accomplished, well-known families, and a lot of them struggle, G2, G3, G4, struggle of that living in the shadows dynamic. So I guess it would be interesting to hear from you how you're living in the shadows of two political titans, social titans. How did you come to find your own voice? Where were, other than the fact that you knew your parents loved you, like what was the expectations that you felt, and how did you kind of really come into your own in that way?
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer that in a few different ways. One, because you asked about finding my own voice. I also really do want to give credit to my parents that they expected me to have a voice. Like the first thing I really remember reading was the local newspaper. We would have conversations over dinner about kind of what I'd read, and my parents always really distilled in me kind of the importance of distinguishing between facts that are important to know and then how those facts can inform the opinions that we may have, but not to muddle the two. And so we would have these very robust conversations around like what the school lunch program should be in the Little Rock Unified School District when I was a kid there. We also, though, I remember in 1986, my dad was running for governor of Arkansas, and he was running against, as I would say to my parents, a not particularly nice man, who still very much believed that there was a logic to segregation, who had been quite demeaning to my mother, would say things like, she obviously can't be a very good mother or First Lady of Arkansas because she has a job. And I would be like, well, I know she's a really good mom, and aren't I the only one that gets to have an opinion here? Why are you pontificating about this? Why is this something that's even in the public arena for political discourse? And so we would have family debates where my mom, dad, and I would rotate between who would play my dad, who would play his opponent, and who would play the moderator. And I think through that exercise, I certainly learned the importance, again, of being able to kind of formulate and make and defend an argument, kind of the importance of what a good moderator can and certainly I would argue should do in situations like that. And, of course, not surprisingly, because I'm deeply biased unapologetically to my family and also my friends, was just so proud of my dad. I think, though, all of that became very kind of important as kind of the intellectual and also the emotional kind of building blocks as the scrutiny around my family just increased, all the more substantially when my dad ran for president. And then, you ask about, if I have advice for people, I certainly, think it's just so critical that we all start with what, most inspires us, what really fuels our curiosity, what sometimes makes us just really angry, and then kind of using that kind of heat to become fuel for kind of whatever we want to start or partner with or do. I have another really vivid memory that also, I guess, partly answers your first question about kind of moments that shaped me. In November of 1991, my father had recently announced that he was running for president. This was back in the halcyon days when presidential elections on my side of the border only were about 13 months, maybe 14 or 15, and not kind of seeming to be kind of terminally always on, which is, I don't think, a very healthy dynamic for a democracy, and unfortunately the one that we're currently living within. So it was November of 1991. I was in my dad's campaign headquarters in downtown Little Rock, and I was stuffing envelopes. I'd graduated from handing out, stickers and American flags to stuffing envelopes, and the nightly news was on, and we always watched the nightly news. I watched the nightly news with my parents. I watched the nightly news with my grandparents. The younger people in the audience are like, what's the nightly news? And that evening, the lead story on all the networks was that Magic Johnson had publicly disclosed his HIV status. And I remember watching the news and listening as kind of commentator after commentator, broadcaster after broadcaster, heralded his courage. And I remember even as a kid, I was 11 years old, thinking, why is something about someone's health requiring of courage? And that question got me really interested in kind of what today we think of as stigma around not only HIV, but many other conditions, including mental health, which you mentioned. It got me really interested in kind of the HIV and AIDS crisis in the United States. That then got me interested in kind of the HIV and AIDS, crisis around the world, and to sort of fast forward, when my dad was getting ready to leave the White House and he was asking, lots of people kind of for advice as to kind of what he should do next. He knew that he still, thankfully, had, an enormous brain and heart and ecosystem and Rolodex, and that all of these could be quite powerful and hopefully still advancing and protecting progress outside of kind of the office of the presidency. And I said to him, and we've talked about this publicly before, I don't think you've done enough on AIDS. I think you should do more. I think this is the great crisis of the late 20th and early 21st century, and you should do more. He was hearing that from other people as well, and so he spent a lot of time, particularly with other people, as he would call them, formers, people who recently had been kind of former prime ministers, former presidents, and they coalesced around kind of what became the early work of the Clinton Health Access Initiative, or today we call it the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. Today it's the Clinton Health Access Initiative, to try to turn the antiretroviral drug market from a high price, low volume one to ideally a high volume, low price one. In 2001, only about 10,000 people in sub-Saharan Africa were accessing the medicines that by then people in Canada or the United States were largely taking, and then consequently able to effectively take for granted that HIV had been rendered certainly a life sentence, but not a death sentence. And that was largely explained because the cost per person per year in the global south was about $10,000 per person per year. Through lots of work, kind of led by my dad and a remarkable team over now many different price negotiations. There are now about 31 million people across the global south who access antiretrovirals. The average price, at least for all the drugs that we've negotiated, is now $40 per person per year. And so of the 31 million people who access those medicines, close to 29 million of them access them through agreements that we negotiated and the funds that we held from Marshall. So I'm incredibly proud of that. I deserve no credit for the kind of effectuating of that work, but I'm proud to have been even just a little bit of like the
catalyst,
the bee in the bonnet, if you will, to kind of push my dad to focus on that work. And I'm really just extraordinarily honored to have been even a small part of it.
Yeah. So let's take us to today. Like, maybe if you could unpack, what is the Clinton Foundation doing today, principally in terms of, highest leverage projects, priorities, the things that you're most excited about, or the biggest puzzles that you're trying to crack?
So a few different questions. I'll try to answer all of them. Certainly we still do quite a bit of market shaping work around the world. We've now negotiated more than 140 agreements that have helped dramatically lower the costs of, and consequently the prices of everything from long-lasting injectable reversible contraceptives. Those are really important to ensure that women have reproductive autonomy, often of their kind of own agency, and not having to require, candidly, kind of the oversight by a partner to be able to do that. We've done a lot of work on vaccines around the world. Some of our newer work, I was listening to the Sick Kids presentation before. Some of our newer work is trying to expand access to pediatric chemotherapies. Again, things that if God forbid any of our children got sick and were lucky enough to go to a hospital like Sick Kids here in Toronto, or to any of our extraordinary children's hospitals in New York where I live, we would never think that kind of these drugs wouldn't be available if that's what an oncologist were to provide. We've done a lot of work to train kind of health worker capacity around the world, and yet we haven't adequately equipped then doctors and nurses to be able to fulfill their obligation to treat once they've diagnosed someone with cancer. So doing a lot in the pediatric oncology space that I'm really proud of and committed to. In the United States, we're doing a lot of work on kind of early childhood education that feels especially important to me as the mom of 3 kids. I'm sheepish to say I don't know what the comparable statistic is here in Canada, although I manage it's not kind of too differentiated to what we see in the United States, that the average child of 2 kind of middle class or wealthy parents who shows up to kindergarten will have heard 30 million more words by the time they walk into kindergarten than the child from a single parent, low income household. That kind of substantive lack of kindergarten preparation and kindergarten ability to learn and absorb, to kind of have adequate intellectual and analytical scaffolding to be able to learn whatever kind of might be coming in kindergarten isn't just a challenge in kindergarten. It is truly like a lifelong hurdle that we saddle our children with because we don't do enough to support parents, especially kind of single parents, to be their kids' first teacher. So we do a lot of work to try to get as many books and as many kind of reading and early math resources into parents' hands as possible. So we've built more than 600 libraries in partnership with Coin Laundromats. So I'm really proud of that work. So Coin Laundromats, for families who don't have kind of washing or drying capabilities at home in the United States, a low-income family spends on average 2 to 4 hours a week in a Coin Laundromat. And so, really trying to turn what we call like wash time into teach time. And so sometimes we have formal partnerships with local library systems like we do in Chicago, and sometimes, thankfully, we work with partners like Scholastic Books and others to donate books into kind of modular libraries that we either connect or build within. Laundromats, we've done a lot of work with large faith communities to ensure that, trusted messengers, many of whom we find in faith communities, are able to kind of give reading materials, but also formula and diapers and kind of anything and everything that new parents need to be able to care for their children, though again ensuring that kind of books and other interactive activities are kind of very much kind of bundled in with what may seem more obvious for the care and nurture of a child. So, really, Mo, just really grateful to work across work that is meaningful to me around the world and closer to home.
And so maybe this second question is just a follow-on question. When you think and you're choosing projects, prioritizing, how do you think about quantifying impact? How do you think about the leverage? And then, I think the reason I'm asking these questions is lots of people in the room. First of all, there's, as you saw, incredibly philanthropic people who are just on the spot support a project. But I think a lot of people are trying to figure out, how do I make my dollars be as effective, as impactful, as leveraged as possible in creating the most good? So it'd be great to hear how you guys are thinking about it at the foundation, and maybe any advice that you might have for families who are sort of starting out on that journey.
Well, one of the kind of principles that I so respect my father for really imbuing in the Clinton Foundation is that we should always be trying to work ourselves out of a job. That kind of not-for-profit at its best is kind of catalytic for kind of the public sector or the private sector. Either kind of can prove the value of something such that it is kind of worth the public sector investing in and stewarding as a public good, or where there then is a kind of a scalable and a sustainable like market-based solution. And so certainly, so much of the work that we were doing, although I shouldn't really, I'm not part of that pronoun, that the foundation was doing, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, isn't what kind of we're doing today. The work that we're doing in HIV is largely now oriented on something called lenacapavir, which the FDA approved a few months ago. It is a kind of 2-dose shot a year. It's the closest we've gotten to an AIDS vaccine, although it's not technically a vaccine. It is the closest we've ever gotten. It provides effectively 100% protection from HIV transmission. The data out of the trials was so strong in South Africa, looking at girls and young women from 16 to 24, that it effectively got raced through the FDA for approval. We did a lot of work with Gilead to ensure that even while we were working through the FDA approval process, that tech transfer was happening to a variety of qualified manufacturing partners around the world, and that until kind of those manufacturing partners were able to kind of scale up, Gilead would make lenacapavir available in the United States and the rest of the wealthy world, but also the global south simultaneously. That's the first time that's ever happened ever in the history of HIV. They're going to sell it at cost in the global south, and they've agreed to a $40 per person price because we need it to be comparable with current treatment, kind of through the generic manufacturing partners. We brought many partners together to make this happen over the last few years. We raised quite a bit of money to facilitate it happening. Ideally, in 2 years, like, we won't have anything to do with that, right? Because ideally, then, like, the governments and the markets are working sufficiently well. Gilead hopefully makes a sufficient commercial return that then will be in the next conversation with them around some of what they're working on as it relates to hepatitis and other areas of grave concern in global health.
So if I could just paraphrase, tell me if I'm getting this right. One of your measures of impact is where you effectively create the impact and then avoid any future dependencies on the foundation continuing to support it.
I mean, so, for example, even going back to the kind of partnership we have with the Coin Laundromat Association, while we help, provide, technical expertise, because not all libraries are created equal. We know a lot about kind of what a dynamic library is, even in a small space, to be able to meet the needs of readers of different languages, different literacy levels, different ages, different interests. But once we help kind of set that up, the coin laundromats themselves sustain them, because they've also seen, it varies on laundromat by laundromat, but on average they see 20% more foot traffic in their laundromats, because people would rather spend 2 to 4 hours in a laundromat with a effective lending library for their children, and often also a really fun, bright play space, than in one that doesn't have that.
Wow. And so let me take it even a little bit more granular. One of the families here, they come up to you and they say, like, Chelsea, I really want to do something that matters. I want to do something, but I don't know where to start. What do you say to that?
I would say, what do you care about? Like, we all care about, I'm sure, lots of things, but there are, like, for me, I care about what can I do to help protect and promote public health, and what can I do to help protect and promote women and girls. Like, when I walk into a voting booth as a citizen, I'm thinking about, like, well, what is the economic and fiscal policy of this person, and what's their infrastructure plans? And, like, I think about all the, different positions that a political candidate may have taken. But as a person, as someone who is, very kind of privileged and honored to have the platform we have, to kind of be in the business of building, like, durable, sustainable partnerships that don't rely on us, who is able, generally for better, to attract a lot of attention to areas that otherwise may not receive kind of the bright lights that I think are merited. I have to think about, well, where can I spend my time and energy and kind of indefatigable passion? And for me, that's, public health and women and girls. I imagine that answer is individual and specific to every person in this room, Mo. And so, I often have, people who come to me and they're like, I really care about education. I'm like, great, like, we aren't engaged in that work, but is there a part of the world that you care about? Because I can put you in touch with, our amazing team on the ground in fill in the blank, Myanmar, Mozambique, and they can probably tell you who the really great, like, education, local nonprofits are doing that specific work.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that. I mean, the way we started the day, by the way, was, and again, we've been supporting mental health collectively for a number of years, and the numbers just keep on rising, right? The mental health challenges. What, if anything, is sort of the leverage point that we could use that you may be aware of that could change the trajectory of, certainly with youth and adolescent mental health challenges, but perhaps more broadly? Anything that you guys are looking at or thinking about in that score that could kind of reverse the tide?
Yes. I want to answer this question in a few different ways. There is no evidence that social media before the age of 16 is good for you. And there's a lot of evidence that before the age of 16 it is bad for you. Like, this is exactly why we need regulation, and we need private companies to make different choices than they have been forced to make so far. So, what does that then mean for us? And then I'll offer a few other complementary examples. We have been supportive of legislation in New York and Arkansas, also in California, in other states as well, but those are the 3 states where it's gotten the furthest. It's actually passed in New York and Arkansas. That's, colloquially known as, like, the ban from bell to bell, right? Ensuring that, kids are not able to access their devices while in school. Right? They either don't bring them to school, or they, have to check them, either in their locker or in a principal's office. Different schools have done this in different ways. This is now the law in New York State and is the law in the state of Arkansas, and it's getting quite close to being the law in California. We're also part of multiple efforts in those 3 states and others to force kind of social media companies to turn themselves off effectively during the school day. So another layer of protection, so that if they know that you're under 16, you're not able to actually access those sites, during the school day. There's other kind of legislation and regulation that we are supporting on kind of requiring transparency in algorithms that either kind of target or likely to be accessed by children, not only in social media, but also increasingly kind of in education and kind of pedagogy broadly. We're doing a lot of work with Pinterest that I think is the best actor in this space. Pinterest, if you join before 16, your setting is set to private. So while you're able to build your own Pinterest board, you can't opt in to having any type of social interaction with anyone else. There aren't even family circles. You can't opt in to kind of even collaborate with a parent or an older sibling. Pinterest by far is the fastest growing social media platform for younger Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And so we hope that that business logic will be sufficiently kind of persuasive to kind of Pinterest's cohort and colleagues in Silicon Valley. And so we know that all of that is an important part of the puzzle, Mo. We also know, I'll just say, I went to public school in Arkansas in the 80s and the early 90s, and when I was a public school kid in Arkansas, I was routinely screened for vision and hearing challenges. I could have gotten my vaccines in school if I weren't receiving them at my well-child pediatric visit. I was given an annual fitness test. We had annual nutrition classes. They were called Nifty Nutrition Teaches. We were taught about sleep. We had age-appropriate reproductive and sex education starting in the 7th grade. And if I were a kid in Arkansas today, none of that would be true. And so I think another area that is really important and where we're increasingly spending time is how do we reanimate our public school system to really be both a bulwark against kind of challenges and also kind of a support to increase kind of the health and well-being and at least the potential of every child to thrive and succeed. And we know mental health has to be part of that. Mental health was not part of that calculation when I was a kid. We know today that it must be. And so ensuring that there are enough school nurses and also school counselors. Only about 1/3 of kids in public school in America go to school where every day they have a school nurse and a school counselor. Many go to schools where that's only true 1 or 2 days a week. And so we know we need to do more on that side as well. And then, of course, just to continue to destigmatize the conversation around mental health.
I want to turn the conversation, because I see we're quickly running out of time. First of all, it's fascinating. You have been a vocal advocate of the fact that, and all of us are seeing, all of us are feeling it, that truth has kind of become this endangered species. And you've been trying to save the species, both with the work of the foundation and obviously with your podcast and so on and so forth. Maybe if you could elaborate, just where did that passion for the preservation of truth come from? And what are you actually doing about it? Because it just seems to get, more and more rare to actually come across truth in the public domain. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
To kind of admittedly once again take us back to my childhood, in 1992, so admittedly now I'm 12 years old, my dad is still running for president. My parents were just extraordinary during that campaign. I was only without one or both of them 3 nights the whole 13 months. They would often leave early in the morning and go campaign and then come home and have dinner with me and put me to bed. And so I very much think about that now as a parent. I take so many red eyes. I may not be able to be at home every night, but I try to see my children every day, if at all kind of humanly possible, and like the airline schedules and the weather comply, because I know how important it was to me as a kid that I never felt like my parents kind of had a dichotomy of quality versus quantity of time. I'm just deeply thankful that I always had both from them. One of the few days where they were gone, it was a weekend, it was a Saturday, and I'd gone to ballet class, and I fell. And I fell on my left foot, and I was like, wow, that hurt. I just did something that clearly wasn't quite right. I need to work harder so that I like land that jump better, and I'm just gonna push through the pain. That was like mistake number one. Mistake number two was I got home, and I was like, it still hurts. I haven't really mastered that. I need to keep going. And I like kind of crumbled to my floor, and my nanny, who was staying with me at the time, because both my parents were already in East Lansing, Michigan for the upcoming presidential debate, was like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, I think I might have actually hurt myself.
Yeah.
So we go to the emergency room. They have to call my parents so that they can consent for me to be treated. My mother is like out of her mind. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna come home immediately. And I'm like, I'm supposed to be on a flight in a few hours. Like, I'll see you before you can get to me. She's like, I can't believe this happened. Like, what happened? And I'm like, oh, I did this to myself. And she was like, what? And I was like, I know, I'm sorry, but don't worry. I'm like, I'm in the hospital now. They're gonna treat me. I had to get a whole cast. This was like back in the day where like, even if you broke something like on your foot, like you had like a whole cast, you had crutches. Like we definitely did not have the modular, like flexible treatment options we have now, right? I like have to hobble like through the airport. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so mortifying. I remember though, like, the stewardesses on the flight were so nice. They're like, do you want us to sign your cast? And I was like, I don't even know. Like, I just got it. Thank you so much for being so nice to me. I get to Michigan. I'm so happy to see my parents. I think they're even happier to see me. Like, go see a movie that night. Get up the next day. We go to the debate. We all like fly back to Little Rock. A few days later, I'm on the front page of the National Enquirer, like Chelsea Clinton throws herself off the roof of the governor's mansion because she's so neglected by her parents. And I remember thinking like, well, no, I just fell in ballet class and then I kept dancing on it, and then I went home and I kept dancing on it some more, and I really am not neglected at all. Like, I feel like I am really thankful to see my parents all the time. Like, nothing about this is true. And there was just this whole period of that 1992 year where there were a variety of stories like that. Like, the most outlandish by far was like the alien sibling that I didn't know that my mother had to like confess was part of our family. But the one that really stayed with me was the one about me. And then there would be others, right? Like, a few years later, supposedly, I can't even remember if it was the National Enquirer or another tabloid, like found my journals. And I remember, they were like total gibberish, but I remember being so upset because there was really poor grammar. I was like, oh, if this were my journal, like there would be appropriate capitalization, there'd be appropriate punctuation. Like, anyone who knows me knows this isn't true. And I don't even like that voice. Like, what are they talking about? So, but I bring this up, Mo, because I've always had an interest in what is true and what is not true. And I think I've always felt that so keenly because I was still a rather little girl when I was subjected to something that was just so kind of evidently not true, and where a group of people had like sat in a room and clearly had decided to kind of write a tissue of lies. I think it certainly has gotten much worse. I also am mindful that my experience kind of prepared me to navigate the kind of social media world, and also kind of this, I think, contested moment that we're living in. Because for me, I have never known what it's not like to be in the public domain, and for most of my life, I've never known what it's like to not have people just tell outright falsehoods. And I think that it is certainly a very precarious time that we're living in now, not only for the reasons you mentioned, where it's hard to distinguish, I think, for many people between what is fact and what is an opinion, what is a truth and what is a lie. We also have a lot of discomfort, I think, around kind of naming something as a lie or an untruth, which I think is not helpful to the public discourse. I also think that the kind of velocity of kind of information, mis and disinformation makes all that harder. And at least in the United States, we're in a particularly challenging moment because we have people, in real meaningful positions of power. In my world, I think particularly about R.F. Kennedy Jr., who are using their kind of pulpits and their influence to actually not only lie, but to kind of adjust the mechanisms of the federal government to try to sanitize, socialize, and extend those lies in deeply damaging and harmful ways. And so I think it's both about trying to kind of cut through the noise and kind of orient on like where we have real evidence and where we don't. What is a fact? Like what is still being kind of worked on in the scientific domain, and what is just not true. And then also trying to put public pressure on our public officials, elected and appointed, to be held accountable for when we're making kind of non-evidence, non-science, non-fact decisions that have real human consequence. And we see this quite painfully right now in the United States with everything happening around vaccines and vaccinations.
Has it worked?
Well, I think we've only had real attention to kind of these issues for not enough time to know, Mo. So I kind of cottoned on to the real challenge of kind of the rising anti-vaccine movement in the United States when I was pregnant with my first child. I live in New York City. I have no interest in living like in a bubble. I live in the city. I take the subway. I go grocery shopping. Like I go to the pharmacy. Anything that anyone has ever said to me online, like good, bad, and ugly, like they say to me in person. And people talk to me all the time. Like people come up and in a wonderful way, like thank me for things my parents did, or sometimes thank me for things that I've done. They come up to complain about things that my parents did, or sometimes complain about things that my parents didn't do, but maybe like President Bush or President Obama did. And I'm like, yeah, I'm so sorry you feel that way, because it's like I'm trying to catch like the 4, 5, 6 to pick up my kid from school. But I share that because I like the first time this happened, I thought, oh, okay. Someone came up to me and said, like, Chelsea, and I said, yes. And they said, please don't vaccinate your child. And I was like, oh my gosh, no, I'm so thankful. Like we live in a time with vaccines, and I didn't really think anything of it. Then it happened a second and a third time. And this was, 11 and a half years ago. And I was like, oh, we have a real challenge. And I really worried at the time that if we had broken kind of public trust in vaccines, like arguably the greatest achievement in human history to protect, extend, like human lives and livelihood, like not just in science, like maybe clean water or penicillin or the other contenders here, but otherwise like vaccines and vaccinations have enabled all of us to like be in this room here together today safely. I worried that once we broke that, kind of everything was open season, including our democracy. And I could not convince anyone that I knew at the time to help build like a pro-democracy, pro-vaccine campaign in tandem. And I think today we still have to be making the same arguments kind of more forcefully to kind of cut through the miasma of often purposeful and weaponized mis and disinformation. Because at least in the United States, we now have children dying of measles. We have children dying of whooping cough. We have collectively more than 1,000 kids now out of school because they have been exposed to both of those diseases and they themselves are not vaccinated. Like this is a deeply worrying trend. And I do truly believe that once people have stopped believing their own experiences and their family's own experiences, it is possible to believe anything. Like my grandmother stood in line in Chicago for 6 hours, and she said it was one of the greatest days of her life because my mother and her younger brothers could finally be vaccinated against polio. Like that is in our recent lived experience. Like this is not something happening in some other time or place. Like these are in our family stories.
Yeah. First of all, just before we wrap, and I know we were going over time, what's the weirdest misinformation headline you've recently read?
Oh, wow, Mo. There's a real campaign in the United States against seed oils, which I find strange because they're often what low-income families can afford, and so I also find it not only strange, I find it offensive, candidly, that someone's trying to say like, oh, don't like buy this like $2 seed oil, but please buy my like $42 avocado oil. I find that really challenging.
Yeah.
We also are very, there's a lot of people at the moment who are, who will sell you more moon rocks than there have ever been taken from the moon. So that is also one that I find notable.
Scrap her gift.
Yeah. So no more moon rocks. Let's see. I also I find there's a lot of attention being paid right now, not only to to vaccines, but to anything that is perceived to be unnatural, with kind of the default being that natural somehow is better for you. And like, well, like radon poisoning, like that's natural. Like arsenic, like that's natural. Botulism, that's natural. Like just because something is natural doesn't inherently mean that it's better for you. And just because something is quote unquote unnatural, like a vaccine or an antibiotic, certainly doesn't mean that it actually isn't important to your health, and arguably more important than kind of any supplement you might take.
Chelsea, thank you for your clarity, your courage.
Thank you so much, Mo. Thank you, everyone.
And your conviction. We really appreciate joining you. We do have a small gift for you that has some of your books. Now, this has some of Chelsea's books. Now, what people don't know is that Chelsea has written a bunch of books. Now, one of the books that you wrote was actually on women, female Olympians that changed the game, right?
Yes, that's true.
Before you go, I'm going to ask you to put this down.
Okay.
I need you to change one game for us.
Okay.
Okay, we've had this game that's been going on for every single year, and I'm sorry, guys, but you do not get this game right. Okay, so here's what happens. No, don't go.
No, I just have to pick up my microphone.
Yeah?
I'm ready. I mean, I don't know. I'm ready.
So this game, I mean, all day I'm hackling them, asking them for money, whatever else. I give them one opportunity to drain my bank account, and they don't get it done. So,
guys, come on.
Get it done.
I don't even know what we're doing, but we have to do better than anyone who's been up here before.
So what we do is we actually have a little beach ball. And by the way, Ashton was rooting for you. He signed the beach ball for Chelsea.
Yeah, that's so, all right. I love Ashton. Also, I have to confess, in 7th grade, I was on the volleyball team, and I won the Most Improved Player Award because by the end of the year, I could hit the ball over the net instead of behind me. So I really need help.
So this is the game. It's a really simple game.
Okay.
I need somebody, we serve it out, tap it. For every tap that you guys make, I match $1,000 of your contribution for the rest of the day. Okay?
Guys, okay.
Literally.
Don't let me down.
Years, and nobody's breaking 10 or 11. I don't know. I think that's our high watermark. It's not really
12.
impressive.
12.
At least 12.
At least 12.
So I think it's the server that's been the problem.
I mean,
and I'm hoping
me too.
you could change this
Me too,
game.
Mo. Oh gosh, okay.
Is that okay? Can I impose on you?
I mean,
Ready?
I'm like, where do we have a high density?
Where that's it.
Okay, all right. Right there. All right, I'm going like just right there.
Go.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
No!
Okay, one more. We knew that this could happen. We knew this could happen.
I feel like it's not my fault after at least 4.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Come on, guys. 5,000 is a bargain for me. So let's try this one more time.
Oh gosh.
Do this right.
Guys, I'm going somewhere. No offense. I'm going somewhere else. Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, they got a game going. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Yes! Way to go! Thank you to Chelsea Clinton. Thank you so much. Here, we're just gonna take a quick picture. Oh. Thank you so much. Guys, one more round of applause for Chelsea.